Gunsmoke was that they dubbed it, the adult Western.
Television has given us some of the most iconic partnerships in entertainment history, but not every famous on-screen duo enjoyed a warm relationship behind closed doors. Some of Hollywood's most beloved pairings were built on professionalism alone. Two talented performers who could make audiences believe in something that simply didn't exist off-camera. Few stories illustrate this truth more powerfully than the hidden tension between James Arness and his Gunsmoke co-star Amanda Blake. For over 2 decades, millions of Americans tuned in every week to watch Marshal Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty share quiet glances, unspoken feelings, and a bond that felt deeply real. What those viewers never knew was that the man behind the badge privately harbored feelings about his co-star that were far removed from the warmth they witnessed on screen. James Arness, a decorated war veteran and one of the most respected figures in television history, once described this co-star using a word that stunned everyone who heard it: truly evil. For years, that comment floated in the background of Hollywood gossip, never fully explained and rarely discussed in public. Now, decades later, the full picture has finally come into focus, and the story behind those words is far more complex, far more human, and far more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. To understand what went wrong between these two people, you first have to understand what Gunsmoke meant to America. When CBS launched the television version of the show in 1955, it was already a proven success on radio. Since 1952, families had gathered around their radios to hear stories from Dodge City, Kansas, a rough frontier town where justice was never simple and life was never clean. The radio version was groundbreaking in its own right. It treated Western storytelling with a seriousness that most other programs of the era completely avoided. There were no easy answers in Dodge City. Good men made difficult choices, and the consequences of violence were never glamorized. That moral honesty made the show one of the most respected dramas on American radio, and it built a loyal audience that was hungry for more. When CBS decided to move the show to television, the transition required more than just new technology. It required a new face. On radio, the voice of Marshal Matt Dillon belonged to William Conrad, a deeply talented actor whose commanding presence was entirely built through sound. Conrad had given the character his soul. But television was a visual medium, and the network wanted someone whose physical presence matched the towering, authoritative image they had in mind for the frontier marshal. Conrad, despite his enormous talent, was not selected for the television role. The decision was purely about appearance, and while it was undoubtedly painful for Conrad, it opened a door for someone completely different. John Wayne was the first choice. The legendary film star was already synonymous with the American West, and his involvement would have guaranteed immediate attention. Wayne considered the role seriously but ultimately declined. His film career was thriving, and committing to a weekly television series felt like a trap he wasn't willing to step into. However, Wayne didn't simply walk away. He cared about the project enough to make a personal recommendation: his friend and fellow actor James Arness. Wayne even appeared on screen to introduce Arness in the very first episode, a gesture of support that gave the new series instant credibility. That endorsement worked. Audiences who trusted John Wayne were willing to give this unknown actor a fair chance, and Arness rewarded that trust completely. James Arness was not the kind of man who sought attention. Before Gunsmoke made him a household name, he had lived a life that most people would consider genuinely extraordinary. During World War II, he served with the United States Army in Italy as part of the 3rd Infantry Division. He fought at the Battle of Anzio, one of the most brutal and costly engagements of the entire war. The fighting was relentless, and Arness was severely wounded by German machine gun fire just days after the initial landing. The injuries to his legs and feet were serious enough to require extended hospitalization and earned him the Purple Heart. But the damage never fully healed. For the rest of his life, Arness carried those wounds in very real, very physical ways. By the time he was starring in Gunsmoke, the pain from those old injuries had become a constant companion. Long shooting days were genuinely difficult. Standing for hours, walking repeatedly for scene after scene, maintaining physical composure under studio lights, all of it cost him something. The production team made adjustments where they could. Physically demanding scenes were often scheduled earlier in the day when his pain levels were more manageable. Camera angles and blocking were sometimes planned around his limitations. But no amount of careful scheduling could eliminate the suffering entirely. What audiences saw as the quiet, measured stillness of Marshal Matt Dillon was in many ways a direct reflection of a man managing real pain with remarkable dignity. His stillness wasn't just acting. It was survival. That background matters enormously when trying to understand what happened behind the scenes. A man who has survived combat, who carries physical wounds every single day, who chooses to keep his suffering private rather than burden those around him, that kind of person processes stress very differently from someone without those experiences. Arness was not a man who easily opened up. He was not someone who socialized easily or expressed his feelings in obvious ways. He was private, disciplined, and deeply interior. And those qualities, so essential to his portrayal of Matt Dillon, would eventually become a source of serious friction. Amanda Blake joined Gunsmoke when the show moved to television and quickly became one of its most essential elements. Her character, Miss Kitty Russell, ran the Long Branch Saloon and occupied a unique space in the world of Dodge City. She was strong-willed, independent, and capable of standing her ground in an environment that was overwhelmingly dominated by men. In the original radio version, her background had been more explicitly complicated, hinting at a past that polite society would have frowned upon. Television's stricter standards softened those edges, but what remained was something arguably more powerful: a woman of genuine substance who earned respect through intelligence and character rather than simply being decorative. Blake understood her character deeply and cared about her profoundly. As the years passed and Miss Kitty became one of the most beloved figures on American television, Blake developed strong opinions about where the character should go and how she should be portrayed. She was particularly invested in the relationship between Kitty and Matt Dillon, the long-simmering, never fully resolved emotional connection that kept viewers endlessly curious. From Blake's perspective, after years of quiet glances and careful restraint, the audience deserved something more concrete. She pushed for deeper emotional storylines, more direct moments between the two characters, and a clearer acknowledgement of what everyone could plainly see was there. She was also, by nearly all accounts, a warm and socially energetic person. She enjoyed the company of the cast and crew, engaged in conversation between takes, and believed genuinely that the relationships people built off camera strengthened what they brought to scenes on camera. Her outgoing nature made her popular with many people who worked on the production. She created warmth wherever she went, and she valued connection as both a professional tool and a personal priority. The problem was not that either of these people was difficult in the traditional sense. The problem was that they were almost perfectly incompatible in the ways that mattered most on a long-running production. Arness was private where Blake was open. He was restrained where she was expressive. He preferred silence during breaks while she preferred conversation. He believed that professional distance could coexist with excellent performance, while she believed that personal connection was essential to the work. Neither of them was wrong. They simply operated from completely different emotional frameworks, and after years of working together under enormous pressure, those differences accumulated into something genuinely corrosive. When a person is managing chronic pain, long hours, and the weight of being the anchor of one of television's most demanding productions, patience becomes a limited resource. Arness was already carrying more than most people around him fully understood. His injuries were private. His emotional life was private. The fatigue that came with decades of grueling schedules was private. When Blake, with the best of intentions, attempted to draw him out, to create connection, to push for more openness in their shared scenes, she may have been asking for something he genuinely did not have left to give. His withdrawal was likely not personal. But without communication, without the kind of openness that Arness almost constitutionally could not provide, it would have been nearly impossible for Blake not to experience it that way. Meanwhile, as the show continued and Miss Kitty's popularity grew alongside Matt Dillon's, the internal balance of the production shifted. Blake was no longer simply a supporting player. She was a star in her own right, featured prominently in the show's promotional materials, discussed alongside Arness in interviews, and beloved by a massive audience that connected with her character on a deeply personal level. For Arness, who had carried the entire weight of the show from its very first episode and who had done so while managing pain and exhaustion that most people never knew about, watching the spotlight shift and expand may have stirred something complicated. Whether it was frustration, territorial instinct, or simply the accumulated stress of years of unresolved tension, the feelings were real and they were growing. Creative disagreements deepened everything further. Arness had developed significant influence over the show's direction as the years passed. Producers trusted him, respected his judgment, and gave him real input into decisions about scripts and storytelling. He wanted Gunsmoke to remain what it had always been, grounded, morally serious, and focused on the work of a lawman rather than romantic melodrama. The relationship between Matt and Kitty, in his view, worked precisely because it was never resolved. Its power came from restraint. Blake disagreed. She wanted movement, depth, and acknowledgement. She wanted the audience's years of investment to mean something concrete. These were not trivial differences. They went to the heart of what both people believed the show should be, and neither position was unreasonable. Writers and directors found themselves caught between two strong-willed people with opposing creative visions. Some episodes leaned toward emotional depth, others pulled back toward restraint. The inconsistency frustrated everyone involved and made the production more difficult than it needed to be. The atmosphere on set was described by those who were there as polite but strained. There was no open warfare, no dramatic confrontations that anyone has reported. What there was, consistently, was distance, the kind of distance that builds when two people stop trying to understand each other and simply endure the time they must spend together. It was within this context that Arness made his now infamous comment, describing Blake as truly evil. The word is shocking, and it was clearly shaped by years of frustration, pain, creative conflict, and personal disconnection. It does not appear to have been a measured or fully considered judgment. It sounds, from the distance of decades, like the language of someone who had simply run out of patience, a man in physical and emotional pain who had reached the limit of what he could contain. Whether Blake ever knew he said it is unclear. Whether the comment was fair is another matter entirely. Amanda Blake left Gunsmoke in 1974, having portrayed Miss Kitty for 19 of the show's 20 seasons. Her departure was her own decision, driven by a desire to step away from the relentless pace of a long-running series and return to a quieter life in Phoenix. She had given the show nearly 2 decades of her talent, her energy, and her considerable skill.